Okay, welcome to the first Machshavah Lab Friday morning women's shiur of the season. Yeah. A couple announcements and then a couple of prefaces about the shiur. So announcements number one, I mentioned this in last night's shiur also, is when I taught high school, then I would start every shiur exactly on time. And for some reason, when we switched to Zoom over the last 2 years, I stopped doing that. And I want to start doing that at the beginning of this year. So from now on, I plan on coming on to Zoom like 5 minutes before in case anyone wants to come on early, but then we're going to start exactly on time just because time is precious. Okay. And so we don't have to awkwardly like wait for people. Okay.
That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Yeah, good. That's and I meant to put that in the email, but I forgot, so I'm going to include it in the email from now on, and that's why I didn't do that this time. Secondly, I think I announced this in the recent email. This year, in general, this is the same as last year, but these shiurim are not part of Yeshiva B'nai Torah. These are my own shiurim. I'm doing it on my own time, and therefore, those of you who have contributed sponsorships, it's much appreciated. And this year, I have to pay for my own Zoom. So, which I just got the Zoom account today. If anyone wants to sponsor Zoom for the whole year, it's $153. If multiple people offer to do that, then we'll just convert those into regular sponsorships. Again, I'm paying for Zoom. I'm paying for my my podcast, and I'm also paying for my time because I'm actually giving another free women's shiur instead of a tutoring client. Like I took off one day of tutoring to give shiur. So any support is much appreciated. And it could be in the form of Patreon, in the form of sponsorships, etc. So thank you to those of you who do support this though. Okay, so I think that's all for that. Oh yeah, the other thing also is we're going to keep this time for at least until Sukkot, and then just see who shows up. I'm totally fine with this time on Fridays, but people committing to a certain time and then people like showing up are not always the same thing. Okay, so we'll see, but this time works for me. And if you have schedule changes that you want to inform me of, let me know, because each one of you is important, and I want to maximize the amount of learning that we do. Okay, that's in terms of bookkeeping. Okay, now in terms of preface. All right, this is an unusual shiur today. Okay. It's unusual in my style because those of you who have learned with me know that the style I prefer is we go through facts together, then we raise questions together, and then we try to answer questions together, and then I like give over my ideas. This shiur is by default going to be much more like me sharing insights that I have, but I want to encourage participation. Like this is not going to be rooted in a text, even though we will go through text. This is a shiur that I decided to do last minute. I had a whole other shiur prepared, and then this morning I was like, nope, we're going to do this because I'm fearful that these insights are going to slip away if I don't get them down in some form. And I thought this is going to be a weird shiur, but I got to share these insights. So I'm going to tell you right now, feel free to participate in addition to asking questions, but to just volunteering like ideas and insights you have on the topics we go through, because this is not us working on stuff together. This is us like thinking about ideas together and like me processing something that I want to like talk out. Okay. The way I've structured it, because I'm always paranoid that I won't have enough to teach, is there's a major point in the shiur, and then if for some reason we end early, there's a minor point, which is very substantive, but it has nothing to do with the major point other than the origin. Okay, so we'll stop the main shiur when we're done with the main point, and then if people are still interested, then I'll share this other point. Okay, so let's get started. So this shiur, what did I title this shiur? This shiur is titled, hold on. A new perspective on halacha from Rav Hirsch ben Sora Umora and something what I learned from talking to a Crow elder. Okay, so for those who don't know, I went on an adventure at the end of the summer. Okay, the adventure was a trip from Mercer Island, where my parents live, where I stayed for the summer, to the Crow Indian Reservation in Montana. Okay, now Google here tells us that it is 888 miles. I actually stayed in Wyoming and then drove back and forth between Wyoming and the Crow Reservation, then drove back. It was a 2,257 miles of driving in 5 days, which was very exhausting, but in a good way. The reason I went to the Crow Reservation, in short, is this book called Radical Hope Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation by Jonathan Lear. Jonathan Lear is an amazing writer. He has the distinction of being three things which explain how I found him. He considers himself a student of Aristotle, of Freud, but he's an independent thinker. Okay, and that's how it came to me in terms of I don't even know who in my yeshiva introduced me to him, but he has books where he talks about Freudian psychoanalysis and books where he talks about Aristotle, and he's very interested in ethics. Okay, so in short, what this book is about is a guy named Plenikouz, who was the last chief of the Crow Indians, who in the 1880s saw that Indian tribes all over the United States were being decimated by the white man. Okay, and by the way, for anyone who's like politically sensitive, Crow Indians prefer to be called Indians, not Native Americans or indigenous peoples. Okay, so I'm not being like offensive here. And basically, Plenikouz successfully, through chachma and creative imagination, successfully adapted his tribe and their values to the changing world, and in doing so preserved his culture, whereas other Indian tribes, either their culture was totally decimated or the people were wiped out. And in fact, Plenikouz was able to preserve the Crow Reservation on the actual lands that the Crows had been on, as opposed to like these other Indian tribes that were like kicked off and put on like the Trail of Tears and other things like that. So I read this book in the summer of 2021. Is that right? Yes. And I read it because the subtitle, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation, is that it wasn't just that Plenikouz sensed that like they were going to be taken over by the white man. He saw that the entire way of life and the entire philosophy of his people was being threatened, and that the concepts by which they defined their lives were going to go out of existence. And that was the challenge. How do you prepare for a new world where the concepts that you use to conceive of yourself and your people and to give meaning to your life are no longer relevant? So what I did was I heard that this is what the book was about, and I read it in.
Can I say a question?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
just understand what you're saying. I mean, I'm reading it, but I had this question also. Are you saying that Plenikouz was aware that his concepts were going and he was trying to adapt, or that the author is identifying that that's what he was doing, but Plenikouz wasn't necessarily aware?
The author is saying that that's what Plenikouz, that's the author's interpretation of Plenikouz, and the author says, I don't know what's actually going through Plenikouz's mind. How much of this is conscious or not. Yeah. So I read this in order to, I read this on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, because I thought this would be this might give me insight into what Klal Yisrael faced and what the leaders of Klal Yisrael faced in Churban Bayis Sheni, when we were going to be kicked out of the land, into who knows how long of an exile, taking a Mikdash-centric Judaism and becoming something else, facing all these threats. And so that's why I read the book, and it blew my mind. It totally blew my mind. It changed my whole relationship to the 3 weeks and the 9 days in Tisha B'Av. In fact, I read it again on Tisha B'Av, and like it changed I gave a Tisha B'Av shiur based on it. And I will include this in the chat. I haven't written a lot about it because it's hard to write. So I wrote this article called 17th of Tammuz Reflections on Waikiki, because that's where I was when I first read it. That's a slightly longer article. And then I wrote this one-page article to capture my thoughts on Tisha B'Av called The Necessity of Metaphysical Trauma for National Tshuva. You don't read them now, but it blew my world. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to journey to the Crow Reservation in order to gain more knowledge about this and to like assess on my own. I wanted to talk to Crow Indians and see on my own, first of all, to deepen the reality of these ideas in my mind. And secondly, like this is, like Esty mentioned, this is the author's take on these, on what happened. And I wanted to like try to see, to what extent like did Plenikouz actually succeed in doing this? Like if I talk to the Crows now, what am I going to find? Okay. So I wanted to do this trip last year in the summer, but everything was closed for COVID. So this year I read it again for a third time, got more insights, and then decided kind of on the spur of the moment to take this 5-day trip. And so I went to, where are we here? So I went to Plenikouz's home. That's his home, which became a state park. I thankfully, almost by happenstance, was put in contact with a professor, Professor Tom McCleary, who is professor of Crow studies, who actually helped the author research the book. And he basically spent the whole day with me and just answered all my questions and took me all around, which was amazing because I was worried that if I came in and talked to anyone, no one's going to understand this weird philosophical angle that I'm coming from. But he helped, he did with me what he did with the author of the book, and he read the author's book. So like, it was a really, really great thing. And then I met with this guy named Dale Oldhorn, who is one of the elders of the Crow tribe, and talked to him about it. It ended up being just this great trip. Okay. Now, today's shiur is not going to be about anything having to do with Plenty Coups or radical hope or anything like that. That you have to read the book and we can discuss it, but this is not at all about that. This is from an insight that I got from talking to the Crow elder. Okay.
The Crow is active right now. Like they exist as a group.
Yes, so the Crows are, they do exist. They are on the reservation. I forgot the number of, let me see, hold on just a second here. How many Crow Indians are there? I think it's like 8,000. No, 11,000. Okay, so the tribal membership is 11,000. Oh, 8,000 live on the Crow reservation. Okay. And I wanted to talk to him, again, to see like, to what extent does he think that, he didn't read Jonathan Lear's book, but like to what extent, is what Jonathan Lear wrote, is it actually like true on the ground? That was kind of like my mission. The preface though, to like this thing is when I mentioned to Professor McCleary that I'm going to meet with Dale Oldhorn, he said, "Oh, Dale, he's a real character." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "He's a very colorful man who has, his own opinions about things. And, kind of like a lot of people of Asian descent, like all Native Americans are ultimately, it's kind of hard to tell how old he is, but if you've ever talked, there's a certain category of old man, probably old woman also, but there's a category of old man that like a person who is intelligent and articulate, but like he is set in his ways and he has his own ideas about things. And sometimes you need to like ask a question from many different angles to get him to like actually talk about what you're interested in. So it was a little frustrating in talking to him because I couldn't get straight answers to all the questions that I had. And in fact, I accidentally snapped this picture, which captures like my like incredulity at like when he's like, it perfectly captures like him like spouting off on one of his like his own views, and me just kind of like okay, yeah, indulging him. So thankfully though, the very first thing he told me was a tremendous insight, and that's the basis of this shiur. Okay, so the insight he told me was, I'm calling this, actually this is his name for it, the 4 Ps. Okay, now I don't know if he came up with this on his own or if he read this somewhere. I tried looking for it like just by Google searches and I couldn't find anyone who said this. So this might be his own idea. Hold on, loud plane flying overhead. Just 1 second. Why can I not pause the record? Oh, whatever. Okay. So, again, he is articulate, but he's also not articulate. So I'm going to fill in the gaps based on my own understanding. Okay. So what are the 4 Ps? So these are the 4 Ps of, I'm going to call it cultural, thriving, and what would be the opposite of thriving? Deterioration. Okay. And they are, and I'll list them all out and then I'll define them. Okay. And they're in descending order. Okay. So from ideal to like from good to bad. Okay. Practice, participation, protection, and preservation. Okay. So, again, this is my understanding of what he said. And what we're going to do is I'm going to define them and then like we'll give an example in Judaism. Okay, so practice is you have fully bought into the lifestyle of the culture / religion and you live it. Okay, so the example would be, let's just, for lack of a better term, okay, I'll just say a practicing Jew. Okay, so keeps halacha, believes the ideas, embraces the values, etc. Okay, so that is practice. Okay, participation is you partially, okay, buy into the lifestyle and partially don't. Okay, so an example of this would be, let's just say the child of Orthodox Jewish parents who goes to shul because his parents make him, kind of keeps Shabbos, okay, etc. Another example would be, this is less common, I think, in the parts of New York that many of us are from, but like in Seattle or out of town, I guess, it's very common for people to attend Orthodox shuls, but they drive on Shabbos, or like they will, I guess in many of our grandparents' days, like there were people who would like keep strict kosher at home and like eat at restaurants, So you are like involved in the lifestyle or the religion, but you're not fully bought into it. Okay, you're not like, it would be inaccurate to describe you in Judaism as shomer Torah u'mitzvos. Okay, and there is a difference between someone, let's say, you're shomer Torah u'mitzvos, but you occasionally like, do an avera, or like you have a really hard time like getting up for minyan or whatever. That's different. That person is still in the realm of practice. But someone who says like, okay, I'm going to keep Shabbos, but like I am going to use my phone on Shabbos. Like, that's getting a little bit more from the practice of the participation, or like I keep all these halachos except for this one. That's in the participation realm. Okay.
Can I
Yeah, sure.
just try to clarify this? And
Yes,
that
please
like
do. Yeah,
practicing it is, Judaism is your life, essentially. It's one lens that you view the world in, whereas participation, you kind of have like a secular lens and a Jewish lens, or
That's a
kind
good way
of
to
like,
say it. Yeah.
yeah,
It's like compartmentalized.
It.
Yeah, compartmentalization. I think that's a good. I don't know if that is the definition or the example, because I'm not fully clear on what he said, but that works for me though. Okay. Okay. Protection is you are not involved in the lifestyle, but you support it. Okay. So for example, non-religious Jews who donate to Jewish schools, okay, or people who support legislation to prevent anti-Semitism. Okay, I never remember how to. I can never remember what. Okay, I don't know what's the in vogue spelling of that, with a hyphen or without a hyphen. Okay, or like, let's say for example, JCC, right? Like someone told me that in his community, like they had a JCC event for like Holocaust remembrance on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, and they served like a whole meal. Like they clearly care about like Jewish continuity, but they're not really involved in the lifestyle. I mean, maybe you could debate whether JCC is in participation. These are not rigid categories, by the way. I mean, there is going to be a line probably between practice and participation, but there is a spectrum. Okay, preservation is you don't even support the lifestyle, okay, but you have an academic interest in it, okay? So the example of this is the completely unaffiliated Jew, or even non-Jew, okay, who has an intellectual interest in an obscure halachic topic, okay, or the art historian who is curious about a particular period in Jewish life, okay, Jewish nationhood, okay. So this is the person. So this is preservation in the sense that, like, the way Dale said it is, he said, like, you have an academic who will like be interested in this, who will write a paper for other academics. It will be read by other academics, and then will just go and be filed away in some academic library, and then no one's going to look at it again. Okay, so those are the 4 P's, and obviously the ideal is you want all the people in your nation to be practicing it. If that starts slipping, then you at least try to get them involved in participating. If that doesn't work, then you at least like take measures to prevent your people from being like actively like targeted. And then like if that doesn't work, then at the very least, you hope that to keep alive like certain ideas just in pure like written form or purely studied form in order to keep them in existence. Otherwise, your people are forgotten altogether. Okay. Okay, any questions on this? Because this is the main paradigm that we're going to be examining. Any questions or comments?
Yeah, I'll comment on the preservation thing, actually.
Sure.
I had a philosophy professor say to us, just to the class to throw away, like, I was going to convert to Judaism just for the structure, like, not even because she believed in God.
That's
And I was like, oh, that does fall into this category, which is interesting.
That is a good example of participation. And it's an unusual example for participation because most people who, you know, don't have like a, I don't want to call that ingenuine motive, but like people who don't buy into like the truth of the thing usually are not going to go that far in like saying like, yeah, right. That's a good example. Okay. So just to flesh this out a little bit more, when I was talking to Dale, then I was asking him like what the greatest threats to his people were. Okay. Now he said that the absolute greatest threats are economic, because economic, when you stifle a people economically, then it puts them into survival mode, and then other things fall by the wayside. You know, so in this case, I'm not going to go into the whole Crow history, but like basically when the white man came, they basically like took the land of the Crows, and also like even the land that they gave them, they like economically crippled them, and then that brought poverty onto the reservation, and the poverty brought other problems of like alcoholism, drug use, starvation, and what it reminded me of actually as a side point is in the Pesach Seder, then we have a halacha of maskil b'gnus u'masayim b'shavach. And when you tell the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, you have to start with degradation and end in praise. And you have a machlokas between Rav and Shmuel on whether the degradation refers to mitchila ovdei avodah zara hayu avosenu, that in the beginning our forefathers were idol worshippers, and then the praise refers to the fact that God gave us the true religion, or whether the degradation is we were slaves to Paro in Mitzrayim, and then the praise is that God freed us. Okay. And, basic understanding of that machlokus is that there were two dimensions of the slavery, and the oppression and the freedom. There's the physical and then the metaphysical or the spiritual, right? So physically we were slaves and we were put in these harsh conditions, and then God freed us and gave us, freed us from that oppression. But then metaphysically we were enslaved to avodah zarah, and God gave us the true religion. So whenever, for many years, whenever I read this halacha, I would think, it's a weird machlokus, because clearly the important thing is the spiritual or metaphysical freedom. Like that's the essence of it, right? We don't just, this is not Disney's The Prince of Egypt, or not, DreamWorks is the Prince of Egypt, where like, the whole message is like, I want my people to be free. Like, there's no talk in that movie of like free to be involved in Yedias Hashem, and in seeking, chesed, mishpat, and tzedakah. But I forgot what year, but one year I realized like, I know what it was. When the first year that I read Yeonmi Park's book about North Korea. This is one of the North Korean refugees, when she talked about how, people think that the refugees escaped North Korea because they want freedom. And she said, we didn't even know what freedom was. I mean, it was so oppressive that we didn't even know the concept of freedom. We escaped from North Korea because we wanted food. We wanted to eat. And until we know that we have like basic sustenance and are not being like thrown into prison for thought crimes, then we can't even think about like higher levels of development, and so like, that's really, it's true that the spiritual freedom is more primary in like a hierarchical value sense, like that's what we're striving for. But on a like baseline, like hierarchy of needs thing, the physical freedom is the most important thing. Okay. So what Dale was saying was that his people were, when his people were crippled, like economically, and were plagued with poverty, then they could not focus on the values and ideas of their religion. Okay. And they were in that state for so long and are still in that state that like many other aspects of their culture have fallen by the wayside. Okay. However, what is the main thing that the Crows do to try to bridge the gap from participation into practice? So they have this thing called the Crow Fair, and they have it every year. I was not able to go because it would have involved me staying there for Shabbos. But it is basically a weekend where they get together, they sing Crow songs, they do Crow dances, they like do traditional Crow ceremonies and all this other stuff. And the whole reservation participates in it. Okay. And just to give you a taste of what that is, I think I shared the sound. Here's just a little clip. I apologize for those who have headphones on. I don't know how loud this is going to be. they have all these competitions, they have all these like presentations and stuff. Oops. And this is really this is their main method of how they get of how they like try to encourage participation in the Crow way of life and in the Crow religion. So I asked, yes,
I have a
sure.
question also. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Are you able to just give like a short, like, or just like in general, what is their like religion, I guess, or like what is a little bit, I know it's like a hard thing to give in a sentence or two, but like, I just have no idea.
The answer is no, I can't. It is loosely speaking, like if you want to categorize it in terms of other religions in your mind, it is a outgrow, most religions pre-biblical era started in like animism, like belief in like spirits and other non-physical entities in nature, and they have ceremonies. The interesting thing, and this is a whole separate topic, is the Crows are a monotheistic religion, okay, that believes in a non-anthropomorphic creator, okay, no qualities, no gender, no emotions, nothing. And I was like, that's interesting. But the problem is, and I was talking to Professor McCleary about this, is that because they believe in this pure non-anthropomorphic creator, they don't worship him, okay? And they don't pray to him, they pray to these other spirits and stuff. And when the Christians came in the 1800s, they liked the fact that they were monotheistic, but they didn't like the fact that they didn't pray to this God. So the Christians like introduced their own word for God that kind of incorporated elements of the biblical God of like compassionate, listens to prayer. And then they kind of like tried to meld that with the Crow religion. And like, this was a whole other shiur that I wanted to give. And like, I emailed Professor McCleary, and like, he wrote me a whole long email about their religion and sent me all these papers about like, about stuff. And I was really interested in it because this is like how Avodah Zarah started with Dor Enosh, but that's a whole nother thing. But just to answer your question, the best answer I can give is that they have ceremonies and rituals that are designed to interact with like the spirit world and these various spirits and stuff. But part of their culture and religion is that they practice whatever works and they discard what doesn't work. So when Christianity came on the scene, they like adopted forms of Christian prayer, and like other things just shifted. The way that that Professor McCleary said is, he said, let me preface my comments with the fact that Crows are not deep philosophers when it comes to spiritual beliefs. Historically, there existed a basic framework, and from that, individuals built spiritual beliefs and practices. There wasn't a priestly caste, caste. There was nothing codified, and religious leaders did not discuss or debate spiritual concepts. The learned religious class as such would have been called the so-called medicine men and medicine women, who relied on their own dreams and prayers and visions to guide their lives, and those who came for religious instruction and prayer. And he goes on and says how like it was very individualized type of religion. So that's the best I can give you, Avital. Yeah. Esty, you had a question?
Yeah, it was a complimentary question, and maybe now the answer would be very short, but like,
sure.
Is there something to say about why they want to perpetuate it?
I think, I can't remember if I actually tried. No, I didn't try to ask that question because I did not want to come across as insulting. Oh, there's the other thing I was worried about. Worried about, by the way, is like, this is an elder of a tribe, and like ordinarily, like with the professor, I was very frank in my questions because he didn't take anything personally. I did not want, especially because I am probably the first Orthodox Jew, certainly the first rabbi that this Crow elder has met. I didn't want to come across, I don't want to say anything that could have been interpreted as disrespectful. So like, I didn't want to ask him like, why do you think this is worth preserving? But I really wanted to. Yeah. So my guess though is that in the same way that many cultures that are not religious or philosophical just want their way of life to continue, because it's what allows them to conceptualize themselves. It connects them to their history, especially when you're dealing with the people who's oppressed, like the Crows are. Then like they don't want to lose. They don't want to lose their their identity. I mean, that's what I assume. But I don't think there's any like, I was not aware of any what we would call like values that were so unique to the Crows that like that they're trying to keep the values alive via the culture or religion. I think it was culture and religion per se.
Right, like the normal way that anybody would want their,
Yeah,
it's a
exactly.
validation and all those kinds of things. Okay.
Yeah.
Nothing specific. That's what I was asking. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Any other questions on this for now? I mean, again, feel free to interrupt. I'm glad you guys are participating. It's not just me spouting. Okay. So this Crow Fair, right? That's the main way that they encourage participation. So I asked him, I said, what I wanted to ask is, in our religion, we have this phenomenon of like youth going off the derech, so like I wanted to ask like how many Crow youth are going off the derech, oh, and by the way, this whole meeting was taking place in I drove onto the Crow Reservation. I was meeting in a Crow cafe, and I took this short video clip which I posted on Facebook if anyone has seen that. I went in, and like I'm used to being the only Jew in a non-Jewish area, but I was the only non-Crow in an entirely Crow cafe, and like they're playing Crow music, and it's all these crows, and it felt like, if and I don't mean this in an insulting way, but like those of you who are Star Wars fans, on the first Star Wars, the cantina scene where he walks in, and it's like a different world of like, what are all these people in these languages and stuff, but I saw a lot of young people, and like at one point, when I was talking with Dale, then this young woman came up, and like, I guess to pay respects to the elder, and he said, oh, I liked your, I appreciated your dance at the Crow Fair, and she said, oh, thank you, and she walked away. So I was talking to Dale, and I said, like, how many of these people who are dancing, are doing this, lishma, like how many of them are doing it as practice, and how many of them are doing it just because like their parents drag them there? And he gave a good, honest answer. He said, I can't see into their hearts. Okay. He said, there are people who are doing it, because like it's what everyone else is doing. There are people who are doing it because they enjoy the physical, like music and stuff. There are people who do it because they appreciate the art form. But he said, I really have no idea how many of them are doing it because they buy into it. So then I tried to be more specific, and I said, for example, that girl who that young woman who you talked to, and then he interrupted me. I said, yeah, in English. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, if I spoke to her in Crow, then she wouldn't understand what I'm saying. And then he said, when I spoke, he was one of the masters of ceremony. When I spoke Crow, he said, I did almost all my announcements in Crow, and maybe 5% of the people understood it. And I said, so why did you do it in Crow? And he said, because I'm hoping that like someone will become interested in Crow and like try to learn it. And then I asked him, like, when did people stop speaking Crow? So he said Crow religion and language were outlawed in the 1800s, in the mid 1800s, but people continued to practice, people continued to speak the Crow language until the 1950s. And then when the mothers stopped speaking it at home, then the language started to die, And he says, you can't teach it in college. Like people who are interested are not going to like learn it, and it's not going to be a living language. And the Crow religion died because of Christianity. Christianity infiltrated and basically like started spreading certain Christian ideas and took advantage of the fact that the Crows were very welcoming and pluralistic in terms of like accepting any beliefs. And Christianity concealed the doctrine that the only way to God is through Jesus. And they like just pushed like the appealing aspects of the religion. And then once they got members of the Crow to buy into Christianity, they had the members of the Crow preach against the Crow religion to the members of the Crow. So Professor McCleary said that he's heard Crow preachers preaching in Crow about how the Crow language is the devil's language, and like they got it from the inside out. Okay, so this is what I'm hearing from Dale, okay? And here's what I'm thinking. My thought is like this. First of all, how ridiculous would it be if the way that we preserve Judaism was through having a Jew fair once a year? Okay, can you imagine a thing where like once a year, all the Jews get together and like all the men put on tefillin and then like put on a talis and like say Kaddish and like, and then that's the hope of the Jewish people. Like, I think we recognize that would not be sufficient in order to keep this alive. But the main realization I had was I'm hearing him say like essentially my people are dying. And in fact, at one point, I think the most brazen question I asked him was like, I kept on trying to ask like what is going to be done to like save this? And at first point I said like, what hope do you have? Like what are you banking on? And he said, it really seems grim. And he said, I'm open to suggestions, which was a very humble thing. And what I'm thinking is like this. I'm thinking I woke up, okay, and I immediately said my brachos hashachar. I put on tefillin, which has in it parshios of the Shema with my essential values and Yetzias Mitzrayim. I put on a talis with reminders of all the mitzvos. I had to figure out in the cabin that I was in, whether the bathroom door, what the separation is between that and like my davening, like, can I daven in this location? I had to figure out what location east was, davening towards Yerushalayim. I had to when I went to this cafe, like I had to assess, can I drink the coffee? Like, because of kosher things, I take the cup and I make a bracha, and I'm thinking to myself, there are all of these reminders that constantly reinforce the values of Judaism. And here now is going to be the main idea of the shiur. Okay. Thankfully, I read a Rav Hirsch the Shabbos before I went on this trip. And this might be the most beautiful description of halacha I have ever seen. Okay. The context is very weird. It's Rav Hirsch on Vayikra 1927, okay, which is about peos, okay, like not cutting your peos. And he says like this, okay, and you don't really need to know that context, okay, just listen to the beauty. And again, this is Rav Hirsch, so he's writing beautifully. It says like this: in the preceding verse, we are enjoined to maintain awareness of man's nobility in our enjoyment of life and in our conduct. Scripture now proceeds to those activities that relate to the human body, regarding which Scripture seeks to awaken the same awareness. For this is the whole purpose of the holiness of Jewish life, to keep us from falling into a lifeless routine, from thoughtlessness, to educate us to perform our actions with awareness and attentiveness. This holiness grasps every opportunity to awaken in our minds the awareness of those truths that form the basis of what we are and what we are meant to be. In light of these truths, we are to evaluate our actions and aims for the sake of attaining our moral purpose. For a man is not worthy of his name unless he examines his ways, and to the thinking man, there is nothing that is insignificant. Right? Yeah. So that is the essence of halacha, is that there is no action in life which is insignificant, because halacha touches every single action that we do in life, or every inaction. And every action that we do prompts us to think. Every instance of thinking is meant to direct us to think about what our values are and what our moral purpose is and what our identity is. In Jonathan Lear's book, he talks about, hold on just a second, let me get the book. By the way, please appreciate how difficult it is for me to not try to give shiur on this, because it's so hard to give a shiur on a book if you haven't read the book. And I just so want to just read to you just all these concepts. He talks about, hold on. If I can't find it, then. Okay, there's this interview of one of the Crow women in 1930, her name was Pretty Shield. And she said, the statement she says, I'm living a life I no longer understand. And Lear gives examples of this. As he said, imagine what was the role of Crow women, is that Crow women were supporters. This is a warrior culture. Okay, so men would go out, they would hunt, and they would fight against their enemies, and they would bring back honor to the family, and they would bring back buffalo meat, and the wives would basically take their identity from how accomplished their husbands and sons were, and they would prepare the buffalo meat and have festive meals. And so fast forward from mid 1800s to 1930, and you have this Crow woman who's saying she's on a reservation where hunting is outlawed, intertribal warfare is outlawed. She's still making the same food, but not for the same reasons. And it'd be we come from a world where we have a Shabbos meal, right? And there's a whole context of Shabbos in our week, and there's a Shabbos meal in the home. And let's say again, in average household, the mother prepares the Shabbos meal and creates this home environment of the value of Shabbos. And people are coming home, fathers and sons coming home from shul and davening and lighting Shabbos candles. Imagine a life in which the life of the non-religious Jew who still is making kugel and brisket, but has no connection to any of these ideas. It's a life devoid of meaning. And halacha keeps us anchored we're in this world where like everything we do connects us back to our values. And even for the people who are not Talmidei Chachamim, who don't know why they're doing all this stuff, it still is like, you're doing it because of halacha, and it's keeping that lifeline alive to the values of Judaism. And that is what halacha is designed to do. I mean, it's just an amazing thing, actually, sorry, let me just give me 1 second. You can think of questions if you have them. Hold on. Oh, that's not it. Oh, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So some of you might have heard me mention my English teacher, Dr. Jones. So I actually emailed him. I bought this book for him and had him read it. And then I asked him for insight into like what my trip should be about. And he said the main idea of the book is, he said, the primary idea I got from his analysis was how complete the disjunction between their prior world, the world of the crow, which he says the world of the hunter, and the world that followed. Everything prior was centered on what they thought being a crow was. And so if hunting was what being a crow meant, then everything everyone did, regardless of what it was, contributed to the crow world. Therefore, everything that every crow did was important, regardless of how menial it might have seemed. That made every person and every action important. Blah, blah, blah. And then he says, yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, so this was a similar thing, is that was the natural state of the culture. And in in Judaism, that would be the state of Judaism without halacha, but it would fade whenever there's any sort of threat. Halacha keeps every action significant in the framework of our values. And that's like what Rav Hirsch is saying. Okay, let me pause here if there are any questions or comments.
Yeah, I have a comment actually. I
Sure.
think a lot about this before Rosh Hashanah, of how like incredible it is that there's a system in which every month or every other month there's like an intense holiday within Judaism to kind of like recenter you. And I don't even know if that's the intention of like how the calendar like just fell out, but every single month there's just this holiday that you kind of stop what you're doing and you think about what's going on in life and everything, and you spend meaningful time with family. And then especially on Rosh Hashanah, where like look at the contrast between the Jewish New Year and the secular New Year. The secular New Year is like fireworks and celebrating and people like partying and stuff, whereas in the Jewish New Year it's like this intense time of reflection and how am I moving forward in life, and like a very deep time of thought. And you think about like all the different ways that every single action is so meaningful.
Okay, good. I'm glad you mentioned Rosh Hashanah because and that example, because I have an anecdote I want to share, which some of you may have heard before, but I'm going to repeat it again. So one of my best friends growing up was Sean, a guy named Sean O'Neill, and we reconnected when I was in yeshiva, my yeshiva days, and he became interested in Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach. So like he learned Hebrew, he learned Sheva Mitzvos Bnei Noach, and like we had chavrusas, multiple times a week. And there's this one, I believe it was like Erev Yom Kippur or Erev Rosh Hashanah, and he said we had a chavrusa, and I mentioned something about how we're going to cancel tomorrow because it's Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and he said, you're so lucky. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, now keep in mind, this is Sean who fully buys into the ideas of Judaism, but he's non-Jewish, so he's not keeping halacha except for the Sheva Mitzvos. He says, you have the entire month of Elul where you're thinking about tshuva. Then you have slichos, where you're like getting up every morning and like davening to Hashem for slicha and mechila. Then you have Rosh Hashanah, where you have the shofar and like davening musaf and like Isser Malacha, where you're totally devoted to these ideas. Then you have the Serasimei Tshuva, where you have like all this time to like focus on working on yourself. And then you have Yom Kippur, where you fast and everyone is involved in this. He says, I just have the ideas, and like there's only so much I can do on my own. And then he gave the analogy, which I quote a lot. He says, it's like you're walking around, he says you, meaning a Jew, it's like you're walking around in a museum filled with exhibits that contribute to your perfection. That every single thing we do has ideas of human perfection in it, and how to get closer to God through perfection of ideas, through mitos, through societal relations. And like the non-Jew just doesn't have that, and like Nav is saying, like it's a tremendous, we have a tremendous gratitude to Hashem for giving us the system. And in fact, that segues into this next point. Oh, sorry. Anyone else have any questions or comments? That it does segue into the next point. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Ahead.
I had to go off for a second.
Yeah.
Who were you just talking about? Who was saying that?
Sean, my Ben Noach friend.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So this segues into this Mishnah, which some of you might recognize in Makos Gimel Tes Zayin. You might recognize it. They say this at the before they say Kaddish sometimes. Rabbi Hanania ben Akashia Omer Rata Hakadosh Baruch Hu Lazakos Es Yisrael. Rabbi Hanania ben Akashia says God wanted to make Israel meritorious. He wanted to give them zechus. Lefikach, therefore, hirba lahem Torah umitzvos. He gave them a lot of Torah mitzvos. Harbe, hirba is the verb of making harbe. Shnemar, as it says, Hashem chafetz l'man tidko yagdil Torah v'yadir. Hashem desired to make righteous and to make his Torah grow great and be strong, I guess, adir. I don't know how to translate adir. Okay, so the Rambam takes an approach to this, which is basically that by having many mitzvos, you're going to find at least one mitzvah that you can do perfectly. Okay. But the Sefer HaChinuch takes a different stance on this. And if you've learned Sefer HaChinuch before, you're going to recognize this theme. I think this is the first time he mentions it, but this is a theme that he mentions a lot in the Sefer. He says like this, and it doesn't matter what mitzvah this is. Da, it's something in Korban Pesach. This is mitzvah number Tes Zayin. Da, you should know. Ki ha'adam, I forgot to bold this. Ki ha'adam nifal kefi pe'ulosav. Know that a man is impacted or is worked on through his actions, is shaped by his actions. V'libo v'chol machshavosav tamid achar masav shehu osik behem. And a person's thoughts will constantly be drawn after the actions that he is involved in, im tov im ra, whether good or bad. V'afilu rasha gamor bilvavo, even someone who's completely wicked in his heart. V'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak kol yom, and all the inclinations of his heart are evil all day. Im yare rucho v'yasim hishtadluso v'isko b'hasmadas b'torah v'mitzvos. If his spirit awakens him and he makes his striving and involvement in persevering in Torah and mitzvos, v'afilu shlo l'shem shemaim, even not for the right reasons, miyad yinte el hatov. Immediately he will be inclined to the good. Mitoch shlo lishma ba lishma. Because of out of lo lishma he'll come to lishma. Uvakoach masav yamis hayetzer hara, and through the power of his actions it will kill the yetzer hara. Ki acharei ha'peulos nimshachim halavavos. That's the line, because hearts are drawn after actions. Your internal world is shaped by the external actions you do. Even if a person is a complete tzaddik and his heart is upright and wholesome, he desires Torah and mitzvos. If he is involved in sketchy things, for example, if the king appoints him to a bad profession, let's say the king makes him into an executioner or a torturer, and he's involved in that job every day, he'll change over time from the righteousness of his heart to become a complete rasha. Because it's known that a person is impacted by his actions, like we explained. Okay, then he says, the Alkane, Amru Chachamim Zal, Rata Kadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Es Yisrael. God wanted to make Israel meritorious. Lefikach Hirba Lahem Torah Mitzvos. Therefore, he made a lot of Torah and mitzvos. Why? K'dei lahatvis bahen kol machshavosenu v'lios bahen kol iskenu lahetiv lanu ba'achrisenu. In order to seize through them our thoughts, and that all of our involvements should be to benefit us in our end, to perfect us. So, unlike the Rambam, who says that if you have so many mitzvos, you'll find at least one that you can perfect, Sefer HaChinuch is saying no. It's the idea that Rav Hirsch was saying, which is to make it so that every action we do is infused with Jewish values, to keep our mind constantly on our purpose and our identity and on the ethical and intellectual values that we hold. Because through good actions, we become affected to be good and to be meritorious for Olam Haba. This is what Chazal meant when they said anyone who has a mezuzah on their door and tzitzis on their garment and tefillin on their head is assured that they will not sin. Because those mitzvos are continual mitzvos, and we are acted upon them by them constantly. Okay, so that's I think it's a complementary idea to the Sefer HaChinuch, to the Rav Hirsch, that it's not just an intellectual reminder of our values. It's that the way our minds and hearts are shaped is through enacting the ideas. And that's why halacha pertains to every single area of life. And without that, like I'm sitting here, again, flash forward, this was all one flashback to like me sipping the coffee when Dale like is saying how his people are doomed. And then I'm thinking about all this and then coming back and I'm thinking in my mind in the thought bubble, obviously your people are doomed. You have no halacha, you know? And in fact, and I'm not saying that callously, but like, you know, the parsha of that week was Parshas Re'eh, okay? And what do we do when we go into the Shiva Amamin, when we go into Canaan? It says, this is a Devarim Yud Beis Aleph through Hey. Ele HaChukim. By the way, can you guys hear the music blaring outside of my window? Okay, good. Thank you, Zoom. All right. These are the statutes and judgments that you shall keep to do in the land that Hashem your God, the God of your fathers, has given you to inherit it all the days of that you live on the land. So what do? When you go into the land, abed ta'abdun es kol hamakomos asher avdu sham hagoyim asher atem yorshim osam es Elohehem al harim haramim al hagvos vasakas kol ranan. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations that you were driving out worshipped their gods on the high mountains and in the valleys and under every leafy tree. You should uproot their altars, and shatter their stones, and burn their sacred trees. And the engraved idols you should to Dayan, cut down. And you should annihilate their name from that place. So I'm thinking about this because it's that week's parsha, and I'm thinking that's exactly what happened to the Crows. They were in America for hundreds of years practicing their religion, and the only other threat to it was the other tribes that had very similar religions. But then Christianity swoops in, effectively breaks their altars and outlaws their religions, and in less than I mean, we're like what, there's like the 1850s, it's like 150 years the Crow are on the brink of extinction in terms of their culture and their religion. And guess what, fast forward another 100 years, their people will completely assimilate, because right now the thing that's holding their people together is like a shared history and shared religion and shared values. Even though they're not practicing it, it's only a matter of time before they move off the reservation and like and assimilate totally, you know. So like, it was just this moment of appreciation. You know, people ask me like what I got out of this trip, you know. It's not that this is a new idea. It's that seeing a living expression of this idea and a dying expression of this idea infused my keeping of halacha with this awareness of like what it is that you know, what the halachic system does for our continuity. I think, you know, my orientation towards halacha is tamei mitzvos and perfection, and what do I get out of it, you know? And I'm aware that halacha is necessary for preserving the culture and nation of Judaism, but seeing this in action really just made me realize how essential it is. Okay. Any questions or comments?
Yeah. I was just wondering, like, what do you think is the relationship between these ideas and like the Beis Hamikdash? Like, when we do have the Beis Hamikdash, do you think it's going to be like a qualitative difference, or is it just like this idea of like keeping Judaism alive, but like to the perfection? Okay,
I'm so glad you asked that, because that's the final point of this year. Okay. Any other questions on this?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you have any like conflict about like, I feel like I would like compassion wise, if like their religion, you know, being threatened, I would probably have like compassion for it. But insofar as it's not like this is what we would be doing towards, you know, Odeh Vozar and Canaan. Like, did you have any personal conflicts or thoughts about that?
I did not, and I think part of the reason why has to do with the other question that you asked, which is that I think if I saw something of real value in their religion or culture, then I would have felt compassion that this thing is being lost. And maybe there is stuff like that, but I just didn't see it. So I didn't feel like it was almost like, you know, again, I'm hope there's no crows listening to this. It's like if, you know, I grew up as a kid in the 80s and 90s, and there was 80s and 90s fashion, you know, fashions go out of fashion. This is essentially just a glorified fashion, you know, like nothing to mourn, you know.
Totally get that. Well,
yeah.
Thanks.
And I look, I felt for him as like a leader of his people, being like watching his people like being destroyed, but I didn't feel anything for it based on like the cultural or religious aspect of it, you know? Yeah. Okay.
I have a question as
Yes.
well. Okay, so in terms of like the acharei ha'pu'ot nimshachim halevavot idea, okay, I sort of struggle with like, this only works though if you understand the tom of the mitzvah that you're doing, right? Like if you're just putting on tefillin every day, but you have no idea what tefillin is about, then like putting on tefillin won't do anything.
Okay. Yes and no. Okay. So certain mitzvos are, their effect is contingent on knowing the reason, or in the case of tefillin and mezuzah, figuratively and literally the content, right? So if you don't know what is in the mezuzah, it will have like, then the ideas are not going to affect you. And same thing with tefillin, as Deborah said, right? Whereas other mitzvos, like let's say tzedakah, or a lot of the mishpatim certainly are going to have an effect on you in a very large form, even if you don't know the philosophy behind it. And then you've got other mitzvahs in between that have an effect, even if you don't know the reason. Like let's do a thought experiment. Like take Shabbos, right? So like, let's say you didn't listen to Kiddush, or you didn't understand Kiddush, and you didn't know that Shabbos was about Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim and Zecher L'Maaseh Bereishis, right? So you would still be affected by Shabbos simply by being forced to like not do malacha. And there are certain perfections that you get from that as well. So that's how I think of these of mitzvos, that there are mitzvos that it only shapes your heart if you know the ideas. And then mitzvos that it fully can impact you, not fully, it can impact you to a large extent, even if you know zero ideas. Because with tzedakah, again, you're literally, you're doing justice, even if you don't understand. If you ask a guy who a person gives tzedakah, what is tzedek, and they can't answer you in like an answer that would satisfy Socrates, they still are doing tzedek and like being shaped by that, and they're still breaking their connection with their money, etc. And then there's like these mitzvahs in between that certain aspects of the mitzvah shape you and certain ones don't. But I hear your point. I guess what I would add, though, is that at the very least, let's say you don't know anything about the content of the tefillin and mezuzah, but you do know that it's halacha, like you're not just accidentally keeping it. I think there still is a value in knowing that like I am deviating from what would have been my normal routine in order to subordinate myself to this system that is part of God's will. And I think there still is value in that, even if you don't know anything from the particular. In fact, I'm remembering now, I'll post this in the thing also. I once investigated the question, we say mitoch shalol lishma ba lishma, right? So the question is, how low can you go, as Rabbi Moskowitz would say? Like, how unaware of the reason for the mitzvah do you have to be how unaware of the purpose of the mitzvah can you be for it to still fit into the category of mitoch shalol lishma ba lishma? And I'm just going to tease this article I wrote, and you could read it on your own. The limits of shalol lishma, which I'll post in the thingy. So there is this. No, it's gonna be too long to go into this. Okay, so if you're interested in exploring that divorce question a little bit more, then check out that article, and then you can ask me questions about it. Yeah, Ayala?
Do you think that like just by doing the mitzvos and like this being a part of your everyday, even if you have no idea what you're doing, then like eventually you'll be like, well, why am I putting this box on my arm?
Yes.
Or like it will just lead to that.
That is another hope that this is that Rav Pesach gave this explanation of the Chazkel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, and the way he expressed it, the way Rav Pesach expressed it was halacha is designed to be like those dry bones in Yechezkel's valley, which is that he says, okay, let me go back even further. The Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Yisrael Chait, said that every mitzvah, he wants to find mitzvah as an idea of human perfection concretized in an action or a behavior. Okay, I'll say that again because it's a cool definition. An idea of human perfection concretized in an action or behavior. And what Rav Pesach said is, he said, halacha is designed to survive long droughts without of no philosophy and no thinking. Okay, because as long as you're keeping the guy who's like, mindlessly reciting Kiddush with a mindless family there, and they're not thinking about it. If you keep that action going, then there is a chance that somewhere along the line, someone is going to wake up and say, wait, why are we doing this? And then investigate it. And then they'll see all the reasons for it. So that is another part of the ingenious design of halacha, that it keeps these things going, even when you have an entire generation that doesn't know why. And let me just pair that with something before I get to your other question, Ayala. So Rav Hirsch wrote a lot. There's a whole part of this year that I was going to go into Ben Sora Umore, which I'm going to cut out now because I don't have time for. Rav Hirsch wrote a lot against, I'll show it to you anyway. In the Collected Writings, Volume 7, which is the volume about Jewish education, he has an essay on the Ben Sora Umore. And I'll tell you the idea I had for doing, this is the shiur that I canceled, okay? Chazal say, Ben Sora Umore lo hayav lo asid lios. So the case of the Ben Sora Umore, the wayward and rebellious son, never happened and never will happen. V'lama nechtav, why was it written? Derosh v'kabel sachar, expound and receive reward. So what I was going to do, based on the idea of Rav Hirsch, is I was going to give a shiur called How to Be the Perfect Rebel, which is taking these very narrow halachos of the Ben Sora Umore. And if you've ever read through the halachos, you'll see why this can never happen. It's very, very, very narrow. And the Torah is trying to give a paradigm of what the ideal rebel is. And if you extrapolate ideas from that, you'll get insight into Jewish education and parenting. And that's what Rav Hirsch is doing in this essay. Okay, so for example, the Ben Sora Umore has to be, you could only make someone chayav for Ben Sora Umore between the age, if the kid is 13 and puberty has started, until 3 months have passed. Once he's past that, he can no longer be a Ben Sora Umore. So it's only those 3 months. So Rav Hirsch has this whole rant against the Reform Jews, and their what they did to the bar mitzvah ceremony, making confirmation, and he goes into a whole rant about it, and then he extrapolates from that why we care about that period between 13-year birthday and 13 and 3 months. So you can read that on your own time if you want. Just do a search for Rav Hirsch Ben Sora Umore, maybe that's how I found it. Okay, anyway, but the reason why I'm bringing this up now is in Horeb, which if you don't know what this is, then you should know. It's a very good book. It's Rav Hirsch's book where he explains the reasons behind all the mitzvos. Okay, and it's in English, and in the intro is by Dayan Grunfeld, who was a student of Rav Hirsch, and he gives a little history about Rav Hirsch's interactions with the Reform movement. As you might have heard, Rav Hirsch was very militant against the Reform, and Reform was emerging at this time. One of the fathers of Reform Judaism was Abraham Geiger, and here's just an excerpt from Grunfeld's introduction to Horeb. Speaking of the authoritative code of Jewish law, meaning the Shulchan Aruch, Abraham Geiger wrote in 1837, quote, "Now open the Shulchan Aruch and give the religious decision whether the pots whether the pots are usable or not. For heaven's sake, is this the way you want to achieve?" Hold on just a second. Sorry. I scanned this from my computer, so that's why it's all messed up. Let me just read it in the actual thing. What is this? Page c.xxxi? Yeah. So he says, "Now open the Shulchan Aruch and give the religious decision whether the pots and pans are still usable or not. For heaven's sake, is this the way you want to achieve a strong religious revival? Do you not go pale with shame and consumed with anger about yourself and your hypocrisy? There's only one way out. The Medusa head of the empty forms must be cut off, even if this work is full of difficulties." So in other words, he's saying this is going to make people religious if you care about pots and pans. No, the only way forward is just get rid of all the technical halacha. Okay. Joke's on him, because look where Reform Jews are now, 200, almost 200, not even 200 years later, and Reform Jews are assimilating and being lost by the by the hundreds, by the thousands, right? So I don't mean jokes on him. Obviously I have compassion for Reform Jews, but this is what happens when you mess with halacha, it's cutting off all these lifelines that Rav Hirsch was talking about, and basically leaving the Jews in a situation like the Crows, where as long as nothing is disturbing the Jewish people, maybe you can keep the values, although I doubt that also. But then once you have forces that are anti-Semitic or assimilation, forget about it. Okay. Ready for the last part of this year? I hope we can go over time a little bit, because I want to read this in full. Obviously, if you have to leave, you have to leave. So one of the things I love about this year is my schedule happens to work out that I can go back to my Rebbe's Gemara shiur. I can go back to Rav Pesach's Gemara shiur. And this year, Rav Pesach only picks the most difficult areas in all of Shas to do. So he's picking Zvachim, right? Korbanos. Okay. So I have a chavrusa that I started this week to try to get background in Zvachim because, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say most of us are not familiar with Korbanos. So the Rambam in his Pirush Mishnayos has a hakdama to kachim or a hakdama to zvachim, to korbanos. And listen to what he says. Ra'isi lahakdim devarim bechaluki hakorbanos uskira sugeim lifnei she'askil b'pirush seder zeh. I've seen fit to preface with principles in the divisions of korbanos and an overview of their categories before I begin my explanation of this order of Mishnah. Okay, so in other words, he's going to give an introduction, an overview. What brought me to this, even though the divisions of korbanos is simple, the kulam mikras b'Torah, all of these are just open psukim in the Torah. He says, and it's impossible to bring in like something astonishing or any deep analysis. Okay, and by the way, if you go through this thing, it's very dry, just facts about korbanos. Okay. He says, why do I do this then? Is because this matter of korbanos has already been lost by our numerous sins. The only people who study it are very few. The and the concepts are not recalled quickly by people to remember them, even people who already studied them. Okay, why? Now here's the important line. Because there are no actions which cause you to review them. And people don't ask about them at all. To the point where the greatest chacham and the ignorant member of the masses are equal. And the majority of students don't know anything about korbanos, even the things that are stated in the psukim, stated openly in the psukim. Okay. So those two things, he's saying, why do we not know anything about korbanos, even the basic facts? Because there are no actions that cause us to review them. And people are not curious about them in order to ask questions. Okay. And again, so the first point was evident in the Crow that they don't have these actions in halacha that remind them of their values. But secondly, the Crows don't have Talmud Torah. There's no text. There's no like set teachings that they have where they can review Crow philosophy or Crow ideas. So it doesn't promote curiosity into their values. And therefore, the people who are interested in the values might keep them going through stories and through teaching their children and such. But there's no vibrant intellectual culture that's going to make them think about their ideas, And the Rambam is saying this about kachim, okay, about korbanos. Now, Ayala's question was, what effect did the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash have? Okay. So I want to read something to you, which is in the there are a couple good editions of the Rambam. This is the Makbili version, which is Yochai Makbili. It's the one. I can no longer say the one volume. Oh, I can't show you my edition because it's all broken up from usage. So I'll get my second one. It's this edition of the Rambam, the one volume. There is a great intro there, and in some editions it is in English. Okay. And he gives, the author, Rav Makbili, gives a beautiful interpretation of this statement of Chazal that says, and you might recognize this from the Siddur, Tana Devi Eliyahu, it was taught in the house of Eliyahu, Kol hashone halachos b'chol yom muftach lo shehu ben olam haba. Anyone who learns halachos every day is promised that he's going to be a member of olam haba. Shnemar, as it says, halichos olam lo, the ways of the world, halichos olam, belong to him. Al tikre halichos ala halachos. Do not read the ways of the world, rather halachos, the laws of the world. Okay, so the question is, what does this mean? Now, I'm going to go a little bit over time. Ordinarily, I would love to like analyze with this with you, but I don't want to go too much over time. So we're just going to read his analysis. Okay, so the question is, what does it mean that if you learn halachos every day, then you get a place in Olam Haba? So here's what he says. Now, this is Rav Makbili. Each morning we recite the following at the beginning of the prayer service. This is one of the things that is customary to say every morning. Okay, I don't know if everyone has this minhag, but he says, so he quotes our drasha. This teaching signifies more than a simple pun. It gets to the essence of halacha and its purpose. Reviewing halachot in all their manifold detail has the awesome power, it is assured, right? Muvtak, you're promised, you're guaranteed a place in Olam Haba, of paving the pathways of the true way of thinking about the world and a correct apprehension of life. Okay, so he's saying halichos olam, the ways of the world, means having the correct way of viewing life. And he's saying the pathway to that is learning halachos every day. The transition from halachot to halichot is the transition from outward acts to molding awareness and consciousness of God. Review of decided halachos, meaning psak halacha, is the key to this consciousness, as long as the student considers not only where the law comes from, but also what its telos is, what its purpose is. Like Devorah was saying, you have to think about the reasons for the mitzvah, not just the mitzvah itself. So we're not talking about just dry like learning of like what to do. You have to do that, but you also have to learn what the reason is. Just as musical notations on paper can generate real music that subsequently affects the soul, so too the halachot can only transform into halichot in context of a life that is fully conscious of their internalization and actualization. Okay, so now he gives an example of this. Okay, thus halachot, the actions, and halichot, the worldview, form a single fabric in the teaching of Torah, a fabric that must not be disconnected, which may repair character and straighten out actions in the Rambam's wonderful formulation from the end of the Book of Sacrifices. Rambam says that that's the purpose of halacha, to lasakin deos uliyasher kol hamasim, to straighten out character traits and to correct character traits and to straighten out all your actions. One of the most penetrating expressions of this is in the halacha about the cities of refuge. This is in the laws of murder and self-defense. If a student was banished to a city of refuge for doing an unintentional murder, his rabbi goes into exile with him. As it is said, I forgot what the Hebrew is. V'chai imach, he shall live. No, I forgot what the lashon is. So what is it? What is the drasha? You must take care of him so that he may live. And for those who have acquired wisdom and those who aspire to, a life without learning is like death. Okay, so stop and just appreciate the beauty of the idea. Okay, if just to talk it through, let's say chas v'shalom, I murder someone, okay, or you murder someone unintentionally, right? Manslaughter, not murder. I should say you manslaughter someone. If this were the time of the Beis Mikdash, I would have to go to the city of refuge, and all of my talmidim would have to come with me. Or if you manslaughtered someone, then I would have to go into the city of refuge with you. Why? Because the Torah says you have to provide for life, and life without learning is like death, and you need your Rebbe, and the Rebbe needs his talmidim in order to live. Okay, so it's a beautiful halacha with the reason like built into it. Okay, so Rav Makbili goes on and he says the power of this halacha, as wonderfully formulated by the Rambam, does not lie in the practice that it mandates, but in what it teaches about the essence of life and death. And he quotes the Mor Nevuchim 142, life means proper attitudes or proper outlooks, not only in the sense of accumulating information, even if they are comprehended, but in man's ability to live with that comprehension in his awareness and consciousness, allowing it to accompany him at all times. This wonderful halacha helps articulate a profound understanding of the gap between the full telos of the Torah, the purpose of Torah, and the role that it fulfills today. All right, this is transitioning now to the answer to Ayala's question. This halacha appears among the laws pertaining to cities of refuge, which are not practiced today because they do not appear in the Shulchan Aruch. I mean, it's not that it's not practiced today because they don't appear in the Shulchan Aruch. It's not practiced today because we don't have cities of refuge, but it does not appear in the Shulchan Aruch. However, it remains significant because it pertains to normal life in all times. Its omission from the standard curriculum of Torah study due its contemporary impracticability completely misses out on the Torah's intention. Okay, in other words, he's saying, if you only learn the halachos in the Shulchan Aruch, you will only learn the halachos that are practiced today. But what you're missing is all these halachos which are not practiced, but still teach you what the Torah's halichos olam is, what the Torah's view of life is, and having the proper attitude and view of how you should live. And then he says, this halacha is not unique. There are numerous halachot dealing with ritual purity, the temple, the sacrifices, the Sanhedrin, Nazirism, and more. To appreciate the degree to which we are missing out on the Torah, it is enough to note that we can fulfill only about a tenth of the Torah's 613 mitzvot. However, in order to acquire the proper attitudes, the entire oral law must be comprehended. The Mishnah Torah is the only work that can offer that, and that is not an exaggeration. There is no other book that outlines every single halacha for all 613 mitzvos in a concise, finalized form other than the Mishnah Torah. And that's why I am a big, I push learning the Mishnah Torah a lot. Okay, we're almost done with this. In short, the point of halakhic decision-making is not just knowing what to do. One of its primary goals is that through the actions, a Jew will learn the correct attitudes. All perspectives on life find resolution through the totality of the Torah's commandments. By totality, I mean the entire oral law. Each law reflects different facets, and a person must go beyond reviewing the halacha, observing or striving to observe the halacha, or understanding the halacha, but must remain conscious of them and live them. This expectation entails the effort of studying, of fitting laws together, and of plumbing the depths of their conclusions. From this perspective, the Mishnah Torah is more than a halachic compendium to know the details of what is forbidden and permitted and the like for all mitzvos. Rather, it also includes matters of attitude and worldview, not just because it incorporates passages that address ethics and Jewish thought, but because the halacha itself is an expression of a worldview and an attitude. The strong link between halacha and Jewish thought can filter out vain and nonsensical viewpoints. With respect to this unbreakable link, the more Nevuchim and the Mishnah Torah complement each other, each picking up where the other leaves off. So to answer Ayala's question, what are we missing when we don't have the mikdash and all these halachos? So, and is it just quantitative? The answer is it's quantitative and qualitative. We are only fulfilling a tenth of the 613 mitzvos, but more than that, we don't have the actions which cause us to study these halachos, and therefore, because we don't study the halachos, we don't have the worldview and the awareness and the attitudes that we should have. So, for example, manslaughter happens today, and what happens is it gets handled by the secular authorities. But if we knew these halachos, we would filter it through what would the Torah say and what would the Torah do and how would the Torah cause us to view this, and that would reinforce and guide us towards thinking about life in the way that Hashem intended. So we're lacking, the sum is greater than the whole of its part. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts, because we don't have this piece, but because we don't have all these pieces, we don't have the totality of the views of how God wants us to look at the world, and therefore we're fundamentally lacking. It's not just missing individual halachos, it's missing the full system. And the best we can do is Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, is study the halachos of the Mishnah Torah, and to an extent also you could do the studying other areas of Gemara, but the Mishnah Torah is the only one that lays it out in halachic form, and then compensate for it intellectually by at least knowing what God would have us do in these scenarios.
So are you saying that by not living it, we're missing out on both the experiential learning and the systemic keeping certain aspects of it alive?
Yes, and even though we can't live it, you could at least learn it, and that would give you it would shape your values in life in some way, even though it's not the same as living it. Having mikdash and being there and seeing it and bringing korban chatas and leaning on it and doing vidui is going to affect you much more than learning the halachos. But at least if you learn the halachos, you'll get what we're supposed to do, and you can think about that and get perfection from the ideas, even though it's nowhere near the actual thing.
I have a question which I don't know. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I don't know who's. Yeah.
I was just saying thank you.
Okay.
I don't know if it's too big of a question for now, but in what sense do we see halacha as the details which are necessary when you have laws? So there's not, I think the Rambam talks about this somewhere, but I'm not exactly, I don't exactly know what he means, but in what sense do we try to get ideas from the halachos, and in what sense are we just we think about it from a law perspective? I don't know what the language is. So
I have an article I wrote on this called "Are the Mitzvahs Arbitrary or the Pillow Mushal?" where I go into maybe we should do a shiur on this at some point. Maybe this one I don't want to spoil for you. I mean, if you read it, then fine, and you can read it on your own. But just to clarify what I was asking, certain mitzvos have, certain aspects of mitzvos have reasons, and certain aspects of mitzvos are just there because you need to formulate the law. Like the example is on a stop sign, the word stop is part of the Tam HaMitzvah, but the exact, the fact that what shape is I always forget what shape stop signs are. Is it a octagon? So it's an octagon. If it were a pentagon, it would still serve as a stop sign, right? So like that's like arbitrary in a sense, you know. So I think Ayala, is that what you're asking, Ayala? Like when yeah. So I maybe we should do a share on that sometime later on this year. I think that pays going back to. It's a good question though. Okay, that is all I had to say for this share. I guess just to bring it home, the upshot is, again, I did not gain this idea from my trip. I gained a deeper recognition of the truth of this idea, that halacha not only like has ideas of perfection, but it is absolutely integral for keeping an awareness of these ideas on our minds, and more importantly, in ways for preserving the ideas in our nation from generation to generation. And that's how we've survived for so many years, even though, and look, the amazing thing is we only have a 10th of these halachos that we're practicing, and yet that's still sufficient to keep us going and to keep like the core of these ideas around, you know. Imagine how much we would thrive if we had the entire Taryag, you know. And again, you know, it's made me, it filled me with gratitude of, you know, Baruch HaMalcham Shenasan Torah Yisrael Mo. You know, blessed is Hashem who gave the Torah to his people Israel, and the Crows do not have a Torah. So they're, I mean, not only do they not have the ideas, they can't even preserve what they have because they don't have a halakhic system. So it's just like, you know, just really, it was a worthwhile trip for that one insight alone, even though I got a lot more insights to appreciate like what Hashem did for us by giving us the Torah, and to appreciate like the system that we're part of. Okay, that's the shiur.
That's super cool.
Okay,
this is one of the things we talk about at the Seder every year.
Yeah, same thing here. Yeah, and that and Seder is our inaugural like introduction to the of the children to mitzvos and to the philosophy of mitzvos. So it's an appropriate time. Okay, any other questions or comments?
Thank you so much. This was really cool. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad. And look, you know, every time I get plagued with like thoughts of like, do I really want to give this weird shiur? Like it's gonna fall flat on its face and no one's gonna be interested. So it really means a lot that if you gain something out of the shiur. So I'm glad it went over well and that I could convey it. Because I did not want this idea to fade away without expressing it to someone. I jokingly told Ari Fishbein, you know, we in yeshiva, there's like a little Dvar Torah between Mincha and Mariv on Friday night. And I guess they, and you know, usually there's a rotation and sometimes if there's no one on the rotation, they'll just like look around and like say anyone want to say anything. And I told Ari Fishbein, who was in charge of this, like last Friday night when I got to shul, I was hoping and praying that no one would ask me to speak, because what would have happened is I would have tried to give over all of this in 7 minutes because I had to express it. I just felt like I had to express it, and it would have like burned up like a shiur, you know. And so thankfully, like no one asked me to speak.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So I'm glad that like, and I'm thankful that like I have people who are interested in this Friday morning shiur, because I don't have to be constrained on what I give shiur on, so I could like give shiur on whatever I want. And I'm just glad that you guys are open to it. So thank you for coming, and I'm looking forward to like learning with you this year.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
I totally love this.
Okay, good.
Me too.
Right.
Thank
Me
you.
too.
I have
Me
a
too.
question. Could I ask you like a totally unrelated personal question?
Sure.
So I have someone who I want to start learning with. I was wondering if you have any suggestions for like something that we could learn. She's very like thoughtful and logical and like really insightful, but I don't exactly know like what to learn. Is there like a book which you could recommend, or like a Sefer? I don't know, something.
Yeah. So what type of thoughtful, like, is this, you want something like in like philosophy, ethics, like that
yeah,
kind of
like philosophy and ethics and like Torah, like mitzvahs, like not only like pure philosophy.
What I recommend doing is, you know, the Sefer HaChinach goes through every mitzvah based on the parsha, and he goes into the philosophy behind every mitzvah. And what I would suggest doing is, you don't have to start from the beginning. You could, you know, we happen to be at the tail end of a really like mitzvah rich series of parshios. So you could either like pick one of the mitzvah rich series of parshios like Kedoshim and, you know, Kisete, Re'eh, Shoftim, and just go through mitzvah by mitzvah. And you don't even have to read the whole Sefer HaChinach. Like read the first paragraph, which is an overview of the mitzvah, and then the Shorashei HaMitzvah, which is a Tam HaMitzvah, and then discuss that. And it's available in English, you know, and you're always going to get some ideas from it. Or you could use the Sefer HaChinach and like learn through mitzvahs that you're interested in, like not be beholden to the order of the book or to the parsha, you know, and just like learn mitzvahs that you're interested in. And there's a lot, like it's knowledge and textual based enough that you can like be learning a Sefer and not just like having abstract open discussions, but it allows you to like think on your own and like get insights and talk about them. That would be my number one recommendation.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that sounds really good.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everyone.
You
All right,
too.
bye.